Thank you for your kind invitation. I'm really happy to be here and to discuss with you our results and your ideas. Maybe because it would be the best if we could really discuss it. So please do not hesitate to interrupt me anytime you would like to ask the question. I will be really happy to discuss it with you. So maybe I will start with a little bit of the introduction who we are. So we are, yes, at the Warsaw University, and I'm with Jacek Szczytko. We are working with such a nice group of people. Of course, they are not all connected and working intensively on this neuromorphic computing, and that's why today I would like to show mostly the work that was mainly done by Krzysztof Tyszka, Magdalena Furman, Rafał Miłek, and Mateusz Król. So this is our basic people that really investigate these in the direction of this photonic computing. But what we also very efficiently collaborate with Michał Matuszewski and Andrzej Opala, who really help us enormously from the point of view of this theoretical concept of this neuromorphic computing. So I would like to start with such a claim that actually we really live in this era of the fourth industrial revolution, when this artificial intelligence is taking like major part of our life, and I think that we will hear more and more about this. The artificial intelligence, what we mean now, as I would like to see it and how I discuss it. So this will be the models actually that can learn from examples, then can adjust to new outputs and really perform like human-like tasks. So I think this is the three main points for the artificial intelligence that we can think of. And if we really focus about this human-like task, so the main concept and how we can really implement it and how we can really build such a system will be based on this, how our brain works actually. So if we look at a human brain, so it's really composed of the number of neurons, have lots of synaptic connections, and what is really particular about it, except from this is really like enormous number of neurons and connection, is also that it consumes only 20 watts of power. So these are really the numbers that are really difficult to overcome or just to implement in any hardware realization. And so we can really reduce such a number and maybe try to build something that is a little bit smaller. And there is an example from biology, which is really like the small animals. In Polish, it is called nicień, that appears to be like the model organism for the investigation of the development of this nervous system. And this is like the simplest organism with the nervous system that actually the map of the connections between all of these 302 neurons was mapped. So this is the example of such a connectome. So these dots will represent like the small neurons, and all of these straight lines will represent the connections between the neurons. What is interesting that from the animal to animal, this connectome is similar in about 75%. So this is like the small map that we can do. But of course, we would like to build such a system, but made of some artificial hardware. So, for example, on this electronics, or then later what I will show you in the photonics platform. But still, the inspiration is from the human brain. So this is what we would like to achieve, the minimal number of neurons. Maybe we can exceed it, or also the speed of the operation. Maybe we can exceed it, we will see. But this is actually the base of this neuromorphic computing. So neuromorphic means that we will mimic this neurobiological architecture of the nervous system of the human brain. So we can have two approaches. One will be that we really mimic exact behavior of the single neuron, or we can build an artificial neuron, but based on the machine learning algorithm. So we will either really the will either build such an artificial neuron, or we can like look more in the direction of this the artificial network that was actually implemented many years ago and is investigated. These algorithms are already investigated. So what I would like to show you today, so this is like my small outline of my talk. I would like to show you that really we can do both. So I will first show you how we can understand this, the signal processing, if we will build a system like mimicking really the behavior of the single neuron, or how we can build a system that will really implement the machine learning algorithms. So let's start with the biological neuron, and of course this is too difficult, so I will simplify it as I need it, like from my perspective of being a physicist, not a biologist. So for me, the single neuron will be like the electrically active entity. So actually, for me it will mean that it has to transfer and generate electric signals, for example. So the neuron will be is composed of the dendrites that actually serve as the input. So this is what collects all of the information from outside, from other neurons. Then it is composed of the cell body that will actually process the information. So all of the information that comes in will be accumulated in this soma, so in the cell body. And then we have the axon that can be actually pretty long, that will serve as to transmit the impulse to the next neuron. And then, of course, the neurons, they do communicate for the synaptic connection. So that's why the neuron before the synaptic connection is called the presynaptic neuron, but the one after the synaptic correction is called the postsynaptic neuron. So then the membrane potential, this is the place where I would like to focus now, is actually it's actually a potential that creates all of the action. So it accumulates the signal and then generates the signal that is transmitted through axon. So if we will look and if people measure actually how this membrane potential look like, so this will be here the difference of the potential in the body and outside the cell. And actually what we can see that it is composed in the long term when we trace this membrane potential, we see that it's composed of the number of spikes. And these spikes appear in the certain distance. So here we actually have like the 5 second range, and the voltage will be actually in the single neuron around in the millivolt range.
Excuse me, but those signals which you are talking about now are basically analog signals. They are not digital signals.
Yes, they are. Yeah, so this is like the signal in the human brain, and this is like we can call it like the analog signals, because this is actually how the human brain works. So this is the real spiking train that is generated by the single neuron. So here I'm not implementing yet any hardware, so any electronics or nothing. So this is like the real human brain that is generating spikes, and the neuron communicates through such a spike trains. And so further, if we look, for example, in detail in such a single spike, so this is zoomed here, or I can actually zoom it further on. So what we see that actually the voltage on this membrane looks in the following way, that we have some resting potential that set us the minimum value. So if neuron does not fire a spike, it is on the basic level. And then if there are some initiation, so the neuron receives additional spikes, actually they do not need to cause the firing event unless they cross the threshold. So there is a moment that the spikes, they got accumulated, and if they cross certain threshold, then the neuron fires a spike, and what is the particular about the shape of the spike, that we have this rising phase, then we reach the maximum, and then we have this falling phase, and after a certain time it comes, the signal, this voltage comes to the resting potential again, so it is actually ready after this few millisecond range to accumulate again the new pulses. So what is particular about the human neuron is actually this time scale. So our brains work in the millisecond range. So this is the range that actually it is required to fire such the spike. And what is also important, that actually all neurons and all action potential are much the same. And these actually, the last part, will cause much of the problems in the implementation or just the building artificial neurons on the large scale, as you will see further on. So this is human neuron, and actually, if we know already this, it is easy to implement, or people figure out, for example, they have different models, how to model this firing event and accumulation of the signal. So this is one example. This is called leaky integration and fire model, and actually allows us to describe this membrane potential and the thresholding mechanism. So so we say that the membrane potential, we can say that it evolves according to this equation. So we can model the behavior of the membrane potential in the following way. The V will be voltage, and tau will be the characteristic time scale. So for example, if there is a firing event, so if there is a pulse coming, so the signal raises up, and then of course it decays slowly. So this is this leaky integration part. But if there are many pulses coming one after another, then the signals sum up and it accumulates. And at the certain moment when it reaches the threshold, we have this firing event. So that's why it's called the leaky integration for this part and this part, like the summation of the pulses, and then the firing moment when the model now generates the spike, that generates the information, and then the resets to zero. So actually this resetting point we need to put like in the model, like by hand. So when the V exceeds some threshold value that we can adjust, then we have to automatically put V equal to zero. So this is the mathematical, one of the mathematical model of the spiking neural network. And actually it has been implemented, for example, in this RC circuit. So there are electronic implementation of the spiking neural network, and the simplest circuit can look in the following way. So we have the capacitor, and then we have the simple resistor. So this works like a typical low-pass filter. So at the beginning, when we look at these input spikes, so we can, for example, say that, or we can model it in such a way that we have a series of delta spikes that appears at the different moment, and then this F will just illustrate me the firing event, and J I have to sum up over all of the information, so all of the presynaptic neurons that just send the signal to this given one that I'm investigating. So this is the input in form of the delta spikes. And then it generates us the postsynaptic current. So we can now trace how this current behave. So we have to sum up over all of the incoming signals. So we sum up all of the old data spikes, and then each spike has to be weighted according to the importance of the information. Yeah, so this will be like, for example, the efficiency of the connection between the neurons. So now this current can do both. So it can either charge the capacitor or leak through the resistor. And then, of course, it exponentially decays. So the voltage, finally, when we calculate the voltage out of the current, so we know that the voltage exponentially decays. And it behaves actually according to this equation here plotted in red. So we can have really the integrated the part of the integration of the signal and then decay, and the sum up if the spikes appears very often, and at a certain moment above the threshold value, it has the firing event and the resets up to 0. So this is the electronic implementation, and of course the time scale here will be given by this the capacitor and the resistor here. And of course it is implemented. So many companies now, they're implemented over all over the world. So the first one we can maybe mention here would be like the true north of the IBM processor, and actually confirmed that the spiking neural network are pretty efficient, and it shows that we have the spiking of 1 million neurons, but the rate actually at which spiking events occurs were at the range of the 20 hertz. So it was not very fast, but it sort of mimic the time scale of the operation of the human neurons. And then we have also lots of beautiful implementation from different companies and the different places. And this is, for example, the Intel Nahaku board, and this is all the time developed so that the Nahaku board can be like put in the series of this board, and more neurons, this electronic neurons are reproduced, but still the time scale stays here at this 20 hertz range. And actually, this is the moment when I would like to skip the electrons now and look more a little bit into the photons, because the electronics gives us this limitation on the bandwidth. So for example, when we compare the true north or the neurogrid, the first implementation of this digital or analog electronics, we are still limited in the processing of the information. Yes, so the fastest operation that you can make is, or the pulses or the spike trains, is in the 10 microsecond range. But when we look about the photonics, so for example, what are the laser pulses that are generated, or how often or how fast we can generate the sequence of the laser pulses, then actually it brings us to completely new time scale. So now I would like to discuss why this photonic computing get important. And of course, there are many people who discuss it all over the world. So let me just show you one example, which I find a very instructive table, so we can compare what are the advantages of the electronics and what are the advantages of the photonics. So first, when we think of the electrons, and then we know that they are good for the information processing. So it is easy to implement any nonlinear operation. So for example, the transistors are a highly nonlinear system. Then of course we can build memory, and easily we can make any system that will cross the gain. But actually for the communication, so for the just to transmit the signal over the large distances, the electronics is not good. Yes, because we have like capacitive loads that actually limits the operation speed of an electronic system. And this is the moment when comes photon. So photons are good for the communication, yes, because we can transmit photons over the large distance with almost no losses. So this communication part is very easy. Also, the easy is the linear algebra with photons, because we can easily multiply signals or add photonic beams. But what is difficult for photons is this nonlinearity, or of course to build any type of the memory. So those nonlinear effects are actually what was the main problem that limits this application of photons for the signal processing. Because actually any nonlinear photonic system, like for example, I don't know, maybe a laser, they have this nonlinear effect that appears at high threshold values. So the energy efficiency of this operation is very, very low. But anyway, people try to do it. So there are really many beautiful examples of this optical implementation of the spiking neural networks. And for example, we can think of the any type of lasers, any type of micro laser or micro laser arrays. So we have either this the realization that connects us to optoelectronics implementation. So part of the information processing is done through the electronic system, and part is done through optical system. But there are also the ideas of optical implementation. So here the VCSELs, phase change materials, or any nonlinear cavities are really good for. Each of the system, of course, has its own problems, like this that I mentioned at the beginning, the cascadability. So just to make many neurons or connection between them, this is pretty difficult. And each of the neuron has some limited functionality, of course. But what I would like to add to this system, like to this beautiful chart, the polaritons. Yes, so the new quasi-particles structure very similar to the laser, but with slight differences. So why polaritons, and why we are interested in polaritons in this photonic processing? So the structure actually is very similar to the structure of the laser. So we have the cavity. So these layers here are the layers of the different, for example, semiconductor of the elixirs with the different refractive index. So they too form a cavity, and to confine the photonic field in the narrow region. And in this place we put, for example, the quantum well, where we can excite excitons. So, and then in the strong coupling regime, we have the advantages of all of the system. So we can have both the photonic part, so we can keep this operation speed of the photonic part, but we can gain something from these nonlinear effects that will appear due to the interaction with matter. Yes, so we can have the operation speed close to the speed of light, short lifetime, which will give us fast information processing, large nonlinear effect at low pulse energy, because the polariton condensation will appear at much lower energy than the pure photon lasing threshold. So how the optical cavity is built. So let's focus now maybe only on the photonic part. So I will just tell how this is composed and how exciton polaritons are formed. So if we consider the optical cavity, so the most important part, we have the two mirrors, and then the cavity. So this is the narrow region between the two mirrors, where we confine the electromagnetic wave here in this perpendicular direction. So if we, for example, inject light at a given angle, it enters to the cavity, and now this wave vector we can decompose on two: the one that will be the perpendicular to the cavity, and the parallel, and the small parallel component here. So this perpendicular wave vector will be, of course, quantized, because we will make only the tiny cavity in the micrometer or preferentially nanometer range. So this vector is quantized. So if we would like to calculate further on the energy of the photonic mode inside the cavity, then we have to include this quantization in this perpendicular direction. So we have here this perpendicular and parallel components of the wave vector. So finally, when we put all of the constant here, so we put the constant here into this under the square root, and then we will say that we are in the very small angle. So we are almost investigated this perpendicular injection. So this alpha will be very, very small, or the theta will be very small. So we can just make such approximation around this small k parallel that will gives us the constant value, will be like this, the basic energy at zero momenta, so at the perpendicular injection, and then all of the small component taking in account this small wave vector in plane of the cavity. So this will be my kinetic energy of the photon confined in such a cavity. Yes? So we have the standing wave perpendicular, but we allow for some small wave vector in the plane of the cavity. So that's why we are saying that actually in the cavity, photons gain some effective mass. And how come? So if when we have the chemical expression for a kinetic energy, where we also have the wave vector squared, so everything that we can have here, we can renormalize and we can calculate this effective mass. So all of the constant value we'll put in here into the effective mass. So this equation resembles this typical expression for the kinetic energy. And what we can have just the effective mass of the photons. But this is like the artificial pure geometrical investigation. Yes, but anyway, finally, we have such the energy versus in-plane momentum will be in the first approximation a parabola, and the curvature of this parabola will be given by this effective mass, which be like the 6th order of magnitude lower than the free electron mass. So actually photon in the cavity does not have the mass equal to 0, but we can actually artificially assign it a certain mass. So this is my photonic component. What next? Now, next, additionally to this photonic component that is confined between the two mirrors, I need to add this quantum wells, so the excitons confined in the quantum wells. So on the same scale here that I have the energy versus the momentum, the excitonic dispersion is very flat because the exciton has much higher this in-plane kinetic mass. So that's why with the comparison to photon, it is flat. Of course, it will be just bended, but much far away for much higher emission angles or in-plane momentum. Yeah, but then what I need to add more to this picture is the strong coupling regime between the exciton and photon. Yes, so there is the limit where with now photon, the photon that is confined in the cavity will excite the exciton in this cavity, and then the exciton can decay to exactly the same photon, and then they will be like the mutually coupled. So this will be in my strong coupling regime, where we have like this recycling process all the time. So exciton, photon, exciton, photon. So finally we can think of this image like the two-couple oscillator. Yes, so one will be the oscillator will be like photonic mode, and the second oscillator will be the excitons. And if they are strongly coupled, so this will lead to new eigenstate of the system. So in the strong coupling regime, we are talking that we don't have the pure photonic mode or pure exciton mode anymore in our cavity, but we have the lower polariton and the upper polariton modes. And now these will be my new eigensystem in this cavity in the strong coupling regime, and this will be the available energy levels that I can now populate with polaritons. So my experimental scheme, so how we will do it? We will send the laser pulses to such a cavity, and the laser pulses will be out of resonance with the system. So first we create a whole cloud of the free carriers that will slowly relax to the exciton, but excitons with a high wave vector, so with the high in-plane momenta, and these exciton will form sort of called this excitonic reservoir. And then for the small relaxation process with the acoustic phonons mainly, they do start to populate this lower polariton branch. And finally, when we really have the high density of the particles, they can populate this ground state and form the Bose-Einstein condensate or the non-equilibrium condensate, which is the state that will be very, very similar actually to the laser, with the only difference that now this polariton lasing will occur at the different energy than the pure photon lasing. Yes, so the exciton, the polariton lasing or polariton condensate will appear at this state, while in the weak coupling regime, so what we really have in general for example, in the VCSEL structure, the emission occurs from the bottom of the photonic mode. And the second difference is with this interaction. So this will be the interacting system. The polaritons do interact because they are composed strongly of excitons. So the excitons, they do scatter, while photon photons do not interact. So here we have this difference of the interaction would actually finally lead to this low value for low threshold value for this phase transition. So the polariton lasing occurs at much lower threshold value than this photon lasing. That's why polaritons are important here, because they will really decrease as the energy that will be required for a single operation. So let's look at the cavities. So at our experimental really system that we work with. So at Warsaw University, we mostly work in the cadmium telluride samples because they are very nicely grown by Wojtek Pacuski in our department. What is special about our cavities at the Warsaw University is that we have the manganese in the quantum wells here in the site, so then we can investigate some magnetic properties of the cavities, but for this talk here, it won't be important. So for my results that I will present further on, it can be easily done with a gallium arsenide cavity or any other cavity that you can think of in the strong coupling regime, of course. So the manganese here is not important, but the cadmium telluride here. Yeah, but the cadmium telluride system, what actually it allows us is with the special design of the structure, we can easily get rid of this gallium arsenide support. So we can prepare the samples that will work both in both geometry, like in the transmission and reflection. So we can, for example, here it will be, we are in such geometry, we are limited only to the excitation from the front and collection from the front of the sample. But if we remove the substrate, we can nicely make like a transmissive cavity where we can excite from one side and collect the light from the other side, which is extremely convenient from the point of view of experimental realization. Yeah, so that's why we really like to work in this cavity, in this transmissive semiconductor cavities. So let's look how the system responds to the excitation with the laser pulses. So let's look now from the bottom here. If we are in the low excitation power regime, so we accumulate polaritons and this lower polariton branch. So you see that the intensity is proportional to the polariton population, and actually which is finally realized as the emission of the light from the cavity. So we see that we have some polaritons here, but if we increase the excitation energy, so if we increase the pulse energy, we observe that slowly at the higher pulse, the polaritons start to accumulate here at the single level at the bottom of the dispersion, but finally at the even higher pulse energy, they all start to emit light from the well-defined wavelength as for example the VCSEL laser does, but the energy here is strictly related to the lower polariton branch. So this threshold characteristic, so the input intensity versus output intensity is a very nonlinear function. So there is a moment where we actually cross the threshold. So this will be the threshold for the condensation when the polaritons accumulate here at the bottom at the lowest energy of the system. And then finally we have the strong emission from this single quantum state. If we look at the time scale, so how fast this behaves, so we can probe and time resolve the signal, for example, below and above threshold, and compare the time scales at which this phenomenon occurs. So if we are below threshold, so when we excite the system with the pulses, so we see that we have the time when we raise the signal and then slow decay, and this decay is mostly related with the lifetime of the excitonic reservoir. So how slowly polaritons can relax to the bottom of polariton branch from the excitonic reservoir. But if we are above the condensation threshold, so this relaxation occurs very, very fast because we have this additional part of bosonic stimulation, which means that actually we fastly build up the signal, and then we have the very slow short decay, which occurs now at the around 13 picosecond time scale. So we have the huge difference in the time scale of the system. So below threshold we have longly lived state, and above threshold we have this fast emission, and also this intensity. Yes? So below threshold the polaritons accumulate only on the certain intensity, but above threshold we have like the huge emission of the signal.
What is the typical Q factor of your cavity? What is the reading time in the cavity?
So this cadmium telluride, they do not have the very extremely high Q. They are around 1000. Of course, the gallium arsenide cavity are have much higher Q factors, and the time scale a little bit difference there. Also, so the lifetime of the excitonic reservoir that we have here and the lifetime of the condensate will be like, as you say, strictly related to the quality factor and some material properties. So for the gallium arsenide here will be probably a little bit more, because the polariton condensate will live longer in the higher cavity. In the cavities with higher Q factor, but this time scales of the excitonic reservoir will depend on the type of the material we will build the quantum well. So this is so these values really are important when we think from the point of view of the material of choice. Okay, so this now we characterize our cavity, and we know time scale and the emission. So what happened now when we will send two pulses in the consecutive way? So we prepare the experiment in the following way. Then we split the laser into the two beams, and we excite the same condensation spot with the two beams, and then we can choose the delay between the pulses, because we set one path on the delay line. So we excite the condensate. So with the first pulse we create this long-lived excitonic reservoir, and the second pulse will come still at the moment when the reservoir is not completely empty. So like this, we can feed the system with pulses and observe how the population accumulates at the different energy levels. So this is the result when we have on the vertical scale we have the emission intensity and the time. And this light blue is the response of our cavity when we have only one pulse, so only one beam is active. So we accumulate the signal, and the signal slowly decays because we are below the threshold. If we close this path and then we choose only the second path, so the second beam, it is a little bit, we chose it at the lower intensity just to keep the system all the time below threshold. So we see that the system again responds, so the system accumulates and then decays. But if we have the collective excitation with the two beams, we see that below threshold, this is actually the sum of the two. Yeah, so the black curve, which represents the collective excitation, will be the sum of this light blue and this dark blue decays. But this is below the threshold. So we see that below the threshold, we sort of accumulate the pulses. But above threshold, so if one, for example, this dark blue pulse will be a little bit stronger in the intensity, that will allow us to cross the condensation threshold. So then our signal and the output signal with this collective excitation with the two beams will be much different, because first it will be much stronger, yes, because we cross the condensation threshold. So we are in this nonlinear regime of the operation, and then the decay is very, very fast. So we see that we can just, like the per analog, we can just generate the spike when we accumulate enough of the intensity coming from this consecutive pulses. So if we are below threshold, we just accumulate, but if we cross the threshold, we fire a single signal, which will be for me a spike. This we could, of course, model with the coupled rate equation. So these are the equations that are usually used for polariton condensate. So we can model the reservoir density, the condensate density, And these are the results of our model. So it really nicely represent our experimental findings. So I won't go into details, but really these shows that we are in the very good representation of this leaky integrate and fire model. And to compare the rate at which this happens, so this is my small summary of the spiking capabilities of the polariton system. When we compare with the human neuron, so of course we gain in the efficiency, we gain in the operation speed, but of course we have the problem with the scalability. So we made one neuron that works like this, but now is the problem, of course, how to now the spiking event from our condensate has to feed the next neuron, which is very difficult to do. Yes, so it has the capability, but now to make the large scale system, we still have to work. And this brings me to the moment when I show you that the exciton polaritons can really mimic the typical behavior of the biological neuron. But what I would like to show you in this remaining few minutes, that actually we can go in the direction of the mimicking this algorithm that are implemented in or we can a little bit take the profit from everything that was developed within this machine learning algorithm and try to build the polaritons hardware based on this idea. So we can have this input, and of course it will be our laser pulses. Then we can make some weights, will be just the adjustment of the intensity of the pulses. All of them will be summed through the polariton condensate that will make us this nonlinear activation function. And of course we will have this the signal output that can serve as the information to the next neuron. And from this artificial neural network, as people build it, is usually composed of the many layers. We cannot do this many layers, but with what we thought that maybe we can try to make, for example, a single layer, like the single layer, and the single layer we will make it a little bit like the digital. So we propose to make the single layer of the XOR gate. So this will be each XOR gate will be our polariton condensate that will receive 2 input and 1 output, and then we can apply this model to, for example, to analyze the hand ridges. So just to make some pattern recognition, and like this, we will use this modified National Institute of Standard and Technology database, which is actually composed of the number of handwritten digit, and this serves as the benchmark how our model or how our implementation is good. So to come back to this image, so this signal we will generate optically, and then we will train only the last layer. So here this weight will be implemented, for example, electronically in the computer. Yes, so this will be like the optical XOR, but the rest of the neural network, this is what we done already only in the computer. Yes, so this is not yet implemented on the optical table. But why we choose XOR gates? So for us, the XOR gates they're important because they are nonlinear gates. So for example, we can compare how the truth table look like for AND gate and XOR gate. So we have the input, there are 2 inputs, A and B, that can be composed on the 0 and 1s, which for example, for us will be represented in the low intensity signal, like 0, and high intensity pulse as 1. So we would like to feed our system with this low and high intensity pulses and to generate this nonlinear system. So the AND and XOR gate can be also represented on such a graph, where, for example, the high value we represent by the red dot, and the low value will be represented by the blue dot. So for AND gate, if you would like to separate now the blue dots from the red dot, we can use the single linear function, and then we have the classification process done with 100% of the accuracy. But this is not true with the XOR gate, because for the XOR gate, the red dots and the blue dots, they are arranged differently. So now if we will choose any linear function, whatever like we will put it, we will never have the separation of the blue and red. We can only receive with the linear function 75% of the accuracy. So that's why the XOR gate is considered as a nonlinear gate, because we need to implement nonlinear function to make the proper classification. So for example, this nonlinear function will introduce us this nonlinear feature space, which will be, for example, if we add additional dimension and we will lift this red above the blue dots. And in this way, if we will make, for example, a plane, which will be our linear function then, or our linear classification after this nonlinear function, and then we will easy with 100% accuracy separate the red from the blue. So that's why this nonlinear function that will add us additional dimensions into our calculation is important. And in the machine learning algorithm, or of this building of this artificial neural network, there are many different type of nonlinear activation function. It can be sigmoid, it can be ReLU, or this leaky ReLU, or renormalized ReLU. They all different from the implementation. Yes, so we can think if they are differentiable, or it's easy to make the analytic, tracked in an analytic way. Of course, finally, the efficiency of the network changes depending on which one we choose, but actually any are good enough. So which actually of those nonlinear function realize our polaritons? So we are mostly in this ReLU, rectified linear unit function, because when we probe this, so this will be like the input power or the input energy versus the emission, so versus the output signal, input signal versus the output signal. So we really have this linear part, and then when we cross the threshold, then we have this nonlinear part. So we think that because polaritons can just really mimic this rectified linear unit, we can implement it as this nonlinear node for the neural network. So now I would like to show you the results, so that where we can really feed the single condensate with the input pulses and then look for the nonlinear output. Or what we can do also is make two condensate in the vicinity, and one condensate will be fed by one train of the pulses, and the second condensate will be fed by the other train of the pulses. And now the question is that how can we code the information in the input pulses, so the low intensity and the high intensity, just to be able to have this XOR gate at the output. Yes, so here we will put the input sequence at the entrance of the cavity, and then the output we will analyze to really make this nonlinear XOR gate. And these are the results. So you see here two condensation sites. They are marked with this red and the yellow, and we have this polarization. So both intensity in both beam the intensity is low, and now it's low high, high low, and high high, where we expect that here we are above the condensation threshold, and then all other we are below the condensation threshold on some mixed regime. So if we trace now the intensity of the integrated intensity within the spot, so we can see that, for example, it is represented in such a way. Yes, so we have many realization of this XOR gate. So we send really many pulses, and we realize this experiment many times just to have this training data and the testing data. But we see that, for example, for low signal, we have the low response, and the higher intensity then is the highest response, but the system behaves very in a nonlinear way. And this is the most important what we're looking for. Yes, just to realize the nonlinear interaction between the two nodes, just to have this nonlinearity that then we will implement into the network. So we define the degree of the nonlinearity in such a way that we take this this intensity, the mean intensity over the different realization. And then we also have to normalize it by the noise. So we take the variance of the intensity, and the noise is mostly caused by the laser fluctuation. So that the fluctuation of the laser that is sending the pulses, not by the fluctuation of the intensity of the condensate. Yeah, so these are the instabilities that comes here are due to the instability of the laser. And then we can define the nonlinearity, and actually we could determine what will be the accuracy rate of making the XOR logic gate out of this data versus the degree of the nonlinearity. And actually with this polariton condensate, we can reach almost 100% of the accuracy, starting already from the pretty even low nonlinearities present in the condensate. And that, of course, was done further on in the computer. So in the computer, we took this signal that we generated by the polariton condensate. So this is the output from the condensate. But then in this implementation we built based on this signal the full network on this scheme that we took the one single layer of XOR gate, and we could, for example, make the benchmarking based on this MNIST digit 100 digit recognition, and then we found that we can reach very high accuracy rate already with a reasonable, let's say, number of this nonlinear gates in the hidden layer. The problem was when we wanted to make all optical XOR gates. So before, as you have seen, this response here does not represent XOR, yes, because for the XOR we would need to have the low signal, high, and then low again. And to make this in the all optical version, what we had to do, we had to mix a little bit the input signal with the output signal to implement the weight. Yes, so from the signal, for example, that is before this linearization. So, for example, from the single condensate, when we send the two pulses to excite the single condensate, and then we are sending low pulses, low high low, and high pulses. We have such a response, but then if we add this additional low intensity path directly from the resonant laser, then we could really make this nonlinear XOR gate that actually the output already represents this low, high, and again low signal at the output of the XOR gate. Yes, but now this experimental setup is much more complicated, that only feeding a single condensate with creating two condensate in the vicinity, and then making electronically this XOR gate based on the output signal from the condensate. Yes, so yeah, and then what I would like to say, that actually what we could calculate is this when we take into account what was the pulse energy that we have to use to generate this signal, then we can say that we are in the regime of around 16 picojoule per synaptic operation, which is actually very good with comparison to the other system. So these are our time scales and the parameters that we could reach. So the pulse duration, the range of the picosecond, pulse energy around 16 picojoules, polariton lifetime in our case, in this case of this experiment, was around 250 picosecond, and the size of the single condensation node was around 10 micrometers. And then we could compare our results with in terms of energy efficiency and this performance density, so how dense we can make the system. So we can compare it with all of the others, and actually with our experiments we are relatively good. But then if we will still reduce this energy efficiency, we hope that we can go even farther. So this case A will be our regime when we will be in the extremely low intensity of the pulses. So we hope that we can reach it when we will use the resonant excitation, so directly in the lower polariton branch, and then we will we will be very close to this quantum limit. To give you the full overview and the picture what polaritons can do, I should mention also that they are good for the reservoir computing. Maybe I will just mention it actually because it is very beautiful work, but we are just like out of time. So I would like to say that the reservoir computing scheme was also proposed by Michał Matuszewski in this publication, and that was very nicely implemented by the group of Daniele Sanvito and Dario Bagliarini in Lecce. So if you are interested, we can discuss it later. But just to sum up our results, so if you are more interested, so these are our work that I tried to show you in this within this 1 hour. I would like to thank once more my whole team, and also, of course, the collaboration. So Wojtek Pacuski, Jan Sowczyński for this work, and our international collaboration, and of course the funding agency. And yes, so this is the summary of my talk. So I showed you that we create a fire model, and then we have some attempts to realize the networks based on this machine learning algorithm, and for example this binarized network. And I hope that soon I will be able to show you the much larger network, and this field will evolve in this direction. Thank you so much for your attention.